Lisa Lucero 教授今天给我们做报告，很欢迎大家啊，稍微介绍一下Lisa，实际上呢，大家可能看到她来自于美国伊利诺伊大学厄巴纳香槟分校人类学系，然后她是我博士论文的 committee 之一，所以今天非常高兴啊，其实好久没见，我们自从我毕业之后就没有见过了，很高兴今天又见到她，而且很高兴她同意给我们做一个玛雅相关的一个报告。我们这个学期有一门考古学理论相关的课程，我们在课上读了Lisa 老师的文章，然后非常的喜欢，所以很希望邀请Lisa 来给我们讲一讲。那么刚才有说到Lisa 她是伊利诺伊大学的教授，她也是美国科学促进会的院士。他的主要研究方向呢就是玛雅考古，他也很关注仪式研究、气候变化、可持续发展等等。然后大家看到这次报告的题目呢，也是跟这个水资源的利用还有可持续发展是相关的。那我的介绍就到这里，我们欢迎 Lisa。Okay,
welcome.
All
right. Thank you, Professor Dong. And I will, please let me know if you cannot see my screen. I'm going to share it right now. Can you see it okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Perfect. And thank you for that introduction. I don't know what you said, but thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I know it's about 9 a.m. your time. It's 8 p.m. Wednesday, my time. But it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for having me and inviting me. I'm honored to be talking about my research to you. So today I'll be talking about the ancient Maya water management and insights for today. And so a brief outline is I'll give you an introduction first about the classic Maya and talk about reservoirs and climate change, and then talk about how I think they were able to sustainably live and interact with the forest, the tropical rainforest, for thousands of years without bringing, massive deforestation and environmental degradation. And I will talk about collaboration instead of forest management or any type of management. I prefer collaboration, and hopefully you'll agree with me after I talk about their inclusive worldview. And I'll illustrate this by talking about cara blanca, which means white face in Spanish, and you'll see why when I show you photos. Because it is a great example of a type of collaboration the Maya had with their non-human world. And then I end it briefly with insights for today. So I work in Central America in the Maya area, and I work in Central Belize here. Cara Blanca, Yabak, Saturday Creek are areas I've worked. And it's part of Belize, northern Guatemala, parts of Mexico, and mostly this area here. And so this is all of Mexico. So this is the area. And, so this is the semi-tropics. So there are wet and dry seasons. And when people hear the term tropics, oftentimes they assume that it's going to be very verdant and green, and it is, but they also assume there's going to be a lot of water. And because of the bedrock, it's limestone. And so that's very porous. So even though there's a lot of rain, most of it percolates through the porous bedrock. So it's surprising about how little permanent surface water there is. And that plays a major role in understanding their water management strategies. There are also a lot of bajos, which are seasonal wetlands. So during the dry season, a lot of them dry up. And during the rainy season, you have like sort of swampy areas, seasonal wetlands. And unlike many ancient cultures or prehistoric cultures, the classic Maya did not have one major king. There are hundreds of Maya cities, and each had their own leader or king. But there are still some that were more powerful than others, like Tikal and Naranjo in Guatemala, Guatemala, excuse me, here, and Calakmul in Mexico, and Caracol in Belize. These are some of the major powerhouses. And oh gosh, here's Naranjo here. So now these powerhouses, these are the largest Maya cities. They are the most powerful, the most densely settled, etc. But none of these are located near lakes or rivers. And so the way I talk, or the way I share my research, is that I sort of build up to the point. So trust me, I'll get there. Now, the cities are hierarchical within the cities, and so you have it's semi-tropics, and they're completely rainfall dependent. You don't have massive irrigation systems because most rivers are entrenched. They're in valleys or gullies. There are no beasts of burden, no cattle, no buffalo, nothing like that. And because you don't have beasts of burden, you don't have wheeled carts because they're the beasts of burden are the one who pull them. There aren't any metals in the geological strata, so no metals. So everything was built using stone tool technology. And rather than focus on these really fancy technological systems, they focus on labor intensive projects. I mean, they are still very sophisticated. But so this is a nice graph here to just show you the ruler on top, and nobles and aristocrats and artisans. And then there's the majority, the 99 percenters, if you will. Now, the period that we call the late classic, between 600 and 800 CE, is a period when this area witnessed the highest settlement density, the highest population number, the most powerful kings, the most interaction, the most mentions of warfare, and so on. So, and it's this period where water management becomes particularly significant. And water in the semi-tropics is critical. And because when water does come, you have hurricanes, tropical storms, or you have annual drought, but then you have actually periodic droughts. So it's either too much or not enough, or just right. So the Maya adapted to the seasonality plus the seasonal hurricanes and tropical storms quite well. But water is critical. And the Belize River, I'm illustrating two dry, the dry season and the rainy season from the same spot. And since these photos have been taken, they have built a permanent bridge, all-weather bridge. But prior to that, we would have to drive our truck onto this ferry, and this old guy would hand crank it across the river. But when the river was very low during the height of the dry season, we could just use it as a bridge. But during the height of the rainy season, there was so much debris here, as you see here in the river, that you can't use the ferry. So the Maya adapted to two worlds, the wet and the dry. You have 7-month rainy season where 90% of the rainfall happens. And it's during the rainy season that is the agricultural intensive period. And you also have to deal with flooding, hurricanes, turbid waters, and erosion, crop damage, and all of these terms and all of these issues that Maya dealt with in the past, we deal with at present. And there's also a 5-month dry season. Now, this is not an artist map or an artist's drawing. This is actually the distribution of soils based on agricultural fertility, specifically hand cultivation. So no, heavy machinery. This is all hand cultivation. Now, class 1, the solid, is actually alluvium, which, like I said, alluvium is rare because the rivers are entrenched, so they're not surrounded by these massive, lovely, broad alluviums that's very rich for agriculture. So that is rare. This is the Belize River. But what you do have, class 2 soils, are these mollisoils. These are some of the richest, most fertile soils in the tropical world, and they are dispersed in variously sized pockets. Now, this area is part of my research area, and you can see the nice class 2 soils are dispersed in this mosaic-like distribution. And this diversity is mirrored by every kind of resource. So you have different flora, different fauna, depending on the soils and what grows there. So you have high biodiversity, but it's distributed. So you don't have clusters of anything. Like you don't have a grove of certain kinds of trees or certain kinds of vegetation. Everything is spread out and dispersed. Now, they have a lot of agricultural strategies, and the most well-known one is the milpa cycle, or extensive agriculture slash and burn, um, which basically they cut down parts of the forest, they let it dry, they burn, and then they plant. And the ash acts like a natural fertilizer, in addition to the soils being fertile themselves. And then they can use more intensive strategies. These are terraces, and terraces were used by the classic Maya in very gradual slopes, not like you find in Bali where you have those beautifully stepped terraces. Here it's quite different. And you have aguadas, which are natural depressions. They line with clay to capture water, and raised fields. So there's varied scales of diverse water and agricultural systems because of the diversity of the nature of soils themselves. And then you have to add elevation, and everything is very localized. Everything is quite diverse. And the Maya adapted in very diverse ways. Now, your typical Maya lived in a thatch hut, which is perfect for the humid, hot tropics. During the end of the dry season, it is particularly hot and humid, and we can, between the temperature and the humidity, it can actually feel like 120 degrees. So you want a dark place like this. And also the roofs are waterproof, but they have to be replaced about every 20 years. Okay. And so this is what a traditional house looks like today. But as an archaeologist, this is what it looks like when we excavate it, because of course, none of the vegetation, none of the pole walls or the thatch roof preserves in the humid tropics. But what we do have are the foundation stones, and we have the thin plaster floors. And also the ancestral Maya would bury select family members in at the floors of their houses. Now, the way it worked is that about every 20 years, they needed to replace the roof. So I think that what they did is whoever died closest to this 20-year period, which is a calendrical time frame, a certain amount of time in their calendrical system, that they buried the person, performed funeral rites, and then deanimated the entire house. They destroyed and burnt everything, rebuilt again, and they had to animate the house because these rituals were about renewal. So as archaeologists, when we excavate, we see stratigraphy, we see layers. Okay, so we just see, but what that represents is this part of this renewal. So when we excavate these commoner houses, they can represent, like both of these two commoner houses, you can see they're not very large by the scale of people, and the bees represent burials, but they were occupied for almost 800 years, and every 20 years, every 40 years, depending, they would rebuild and terminate, burn, rebuild, animate, and to animate they would deposit whole items. So we have this very rich, from commoner to elites to royals, they have the same, what we call a depositional history. It's just a difference of scale, and of course the elites and royals have much nicer stuff that they use. So, and I'll get back to this as well in terms of the renewal cycle. Now, this is LIDAR has exposed just the nature of the complex settlement history in this area. This is in the Petén, which is in northern Guatemala, and archaeologists estimate that the interior lowlands supported 7 to 11 million people, which is much more than currently live there now. Now, what you have, though, you have cities, this large architectural features here. But I mentioned before that the agricultural intensive period happens during the rainy season. I also mentioned that the fertile soils are dispersed all over. So what you have is you have a sort of tropics are known for being these pulsating systems Well, same things the Maya adapted by becoming pulsating systems themselves, in the sense that during the rainy season, they're in their farms, living in their communities, working in their fields, taking care of families and local affairs. All right. During the dry season, this was the time for more different kinds of events. But so during the centrifugal rainy season, during this agriculture intensive period, because of the dispersed resources, this is where they grow the main staples of maize or corn, beans, squash, manioc, cacao, tomatoes, tobacco, pineapple, avocados. Now, rural farmers, though, provided tribute. They didn't have a currency system. There was no money system. The royals, the rulers, the leaders, instead of taxing people, they acquired tribute in the form of labor, services, and goods. But why would commoners contribute to building palaces and temples and plazas and ball courts and causeways, etc.? Because during the dry season, there was a centripetal pool of the cities. Maya cities are famous for their palaces and temples and ball courts. But was it enough? Was it enough to have markets and ball games and ceremonial events? Well, to me, and I argue in my publications that the reservoirs that like this is the artist rendition, they built these massive reservoir systems to compensate, to offset the water scarcity during the 5-month dry season, 3 months of which it does not rain at all. It does not rain for 3 months. This is also the agricultural downtime. So it's a perfect time to conduct, battle skirmishes. It's a perfect time to build, to maintain, to congregate. And also, and most importantly, this is a time in these areas with great fertile soils, but little surface water. They needed access to water. During the rainy season, of course, you don't need access to water, but during the dry season, you needed water. So over time, and it didn't start during the classic period, but much earlier, they started experimenting, and increasingly the reservoir systems became more and more sophisticated, to where the entire urban planning and layout revolved around a water system. So Maya cities are like water catchment systems. They have channels and ditches and to divert water or to drain water. It was all about water. And this is what they built. And these are some of the temples of the Great Plaza. And these are solid structures here. So it's the area up here. This is where the royals would be, in the priests performing ceremonies. And this is limestone. And down here, it could have held, thousands of people. And they're acoustically engineered, where you can be on top here or here and project your voice as we professors do in class, and people below can hear you. Plus there's music, there's drums, there are flutes, there are incense, copal incense is an aromatic incense from a tree resin. There's all this stuff going on, and all the pomp and circumstance. And this is one of the burials of one of the most powerful Maya kings, who is buried in this temple here, this pyramid temple here. His name is Hasao Chantawil. And like I said, they didn't have metals. What they did have, from the highlands of Guatemala, was jade. Okay. And as you know, it's quite a very hard stone, and they didn't have metals. So to create these, these headpieces and ear spools and necklaces or breastplates and bracelets and belts and all of this, they use sand and water. Okay. Now, they also had an exquisite writing system. But the reason that Maya history is not found in history departments is because the writing, and it's a true writing system, but it only focused on royal life. So it only focused on when, kings were born, who they married, especially if it was a daughter of another king, the battles they participated in, if they captured another king, what ceremonies they performed. So it is, so this is what a stela looks like. And they are in the plazas. Let me just go back really. Like here, these are stela in altars, and they're all covered in inscriptions. And this is just one example. You can see the drawing. This is an early classic ruler. And these are actually jade cells, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But on the back is the history of this particular king. So in how you read it is you start on the upper left and you just go one over and you go in a zigzag all the way down, and then you start up the other two and you same thing, zigzag. And I'm not an epigrapher, but the majority of glyphs have been deciphered. And it's a really fascinating process, and it's exquisite. It's beautiful. But because of the beauty, we do have a major problem with looting and black market illegal selling of items. It's much better, but it's still a problem we face, especially with the jungle. It hides everything, including illegal excavations, looting. And so, and they loot not only because of the beautiful inscriptions, but the jade items, as well as the beautifully painted ceramics. And everything in this world, which I'll briefly talk about later, about their inclusive worldview, everything was animated. Everything had a soul. So before things were could be start on a different journey on their life history, if you will, like this is a serving vessel, but later it became a dedicatory offering. So before it could go from a serving vessel to a dedicatory offering, it had to be deanimated before it started its life history on it, or different journey on its life history. So you can see a kill hole, it's called, that deanimated it. Now this one is pristine because it was made as a dedicatory offering. So it didn't need to be deanimated, just animated. So, I mean, everything just is connected, and this will become clear hopefully later on. And I can take questions afterwards. So let's talk about the ancient Maya reservoirs. Sorry, I'm writing myself a note. Okay, now reservoirs, they're still water systems. So there's not a flowing system. They're still water systems like a big pool. The earliest evidence is about 400 BCE. They use gravity to contain water. But as they became more sophisticated, epitomized in the late classic period, they built these large upstream or uphill reservoirs, because they were able to contain water, capture water from this, during the 7-month rainy season. They used dams. They diverted excess water. They used sealants, sluices, dams, and berms, spillways, channels, switching station, filtration systems, etc. Again, a very sophisticated system. And this is an artist's rendition of showing the elevation with Tikal, which is the pictures I showed you of the temples. And you can see this causeway, Asak Bay, is also, not only is it a walkway for processions and the like, but it is also, it also serves as a dam, but also serves to capture water. So everything's multifunctional. And then also, these are these elevated reservoir systems. As they clear out this system, they can use the gray water downslope for Bajo, the seasonal wetland margin reservoirs, and Aguadas for orchards, for gardens, for urban fields, fish ponds, construction projects, and also to attract game and waterfowl. I mean, they're looking for water as well. So again, urban layout revolves around this water system. So the city is a water system, okay? Now, the major issue is water quality. I mean, one of the things I think, we all know is that standing water, still water, if not taken care of, can become quite stagnant. And this can result in, the proliferation of waterborne diseases, as well as serve as breeding grounds for mosquitoes and flies, Also, you have the buildup of nitrogen and phosphorus, too much of which is particularly dangerous to young children. Okay. And it promotes, so how did they keep this clean? Because they relied on these reservoirs for over 1,000 years. So clearly they were doing something right, because one of the things about that, urban planners and policymakers are dealing with today, it's not enough to supply water. The water has to be drinkable. One has to be able to drink it without getting sick. So the question is, how did the Maya maintain water quality, given that reservoirs and kings lasted for over 1,000 years? Well, I argue, and I published on bits of this, and I'm working, I have an article under review and a book that's due at the end of the summer, and where I really expand upon this. So they applied, the Maya have been living, and their ancestors have been living in this area at least from 13,000 years ago. When they became Maya is another story. But just because, I argue that they applied their traditional ecological knowledge, which in the literature is TEK, to mimic what are called wetland biospheres, which are these natural systems that work together to keep water clean and enough to provide for plants and for animals and for everything else. In other words, they mimicked these wetland biospheres to create self-cleaning reservoirs, which today civil engineers or urban planners call constructed wetlands. Constructed wetlands are a thing, and they are being increasingly built all over the world. What it consists of are various kinds of aquatic plants, macrophytic and hydrophytic, and other organisms like certain kinds of bacteria and certain kinds of fish. They work together to keep water clean. So, for example, decomposing plant matter creates a biofilm that absorbs nitrogen. Aquatic plants also uptake nitrogen and phosphorus. Okay. So it serves, and then also these reservoirs or constructed wetlands that they're called today would have supported diverse biota, edible and medicinal aquatic plants, reeds to make basketry, bamboo to make fish spears and other implements, also fish, for protein, eels, turtles, crabs, shrimp, mollusks, and snails. So it was it's a little ecosystem. Now the bottom debris also had fish species. Now, constructed wetlands, we know today, and there's a massive amount of literature on it, you have to dredge them you have to dredge out the bottom once in a while, as well as replace the aquatic plants. But in so doing, you have this excellent fertilizer. And I'm sure the Maya used the bottom debris as fertilizer in their urban gardens and fields and orchards, etc. And they would, and same thing with the aquatic plants they had to replace. They are saturated with nitrogen or phosphorus, which is something soils need to maintain their productivity for agriculture. So everything is connected, everything works together. And now, what we still find today are water lilies on the surface. And this is very similar to the lotus in Southeast Asia, where I've worked with colleagues in Cambodia at Angkor. So that's what I'm most familiar with. Now, archaeologists thought that because Nymphaea ampla are still found on water bodies today in the Maya area, and they're in the iconography, and I'll show you that in a bit, I think the next slide, they assumed that they were part of the cleansing process, since all plants uptake nitrogen and phosphorus. But they're actually very sensitive plants that can only grow in clean water. So in other words, when you see this species, Nymphaea ampla, you know the water is clean. You can drink it. Okay. Now, it just so happens that water lilies symbolize Maya rulership. They wear headdresses, and they're in the iconography and the inscriptions. So in other words, kings are, one of their duties are as water managers, and they perform the vital ceremonies, water and rain for the Chak, the rain god, as well as to ancestors. And they organize the maintenance during the dry season. Right? The perfect time to maintain the reservoirs is the dry season, when they're preparing them for the onslaught of the rainy season. Okay, so this, I argue, was their foundation of power. They could draw subjects in, okay, as long as they supplied water. But by 900 CE, these hundreds of cities in the southern Maya lowlands, the area I'm talking about, were completely abandoned. But even this shot of Tikal, this is a great plaza, there are palaces and temples and ball courts and causeways. There are elite structures, but most of the farmers live on the outskirts and in between cities. So when cities are abandoned, it's the elite structure that collapsed, not the society. Okay, and there's increasing evidence. I'm using a stalagmite from a cave, using oxygen isotope analysis, that there were several prolonged droughts between this period, between 800 and 900. And this is the period, the 100-year period, where these southern lowland centers or cities were being abandoned. People just left. Okay. And so it's what happened was these several prolonged droughts set in motion events that exacerbated any existing problems, because, like I said, the late Classic was the most densely settled, where the most resources are used. And also, with drought, you have the reservoirs levels would have dropped. Perhaps water lilies started to die. Crops were starting to fail. So people left cities and kings by 900 CE. Maya families and farmers immigrated to coastal areas or areas with surface water, like lakes and rivers. So kings disappeared for good in the southern Maya lowlands because they were path dependent. In other words, like we're path dependent on fossil fuels, the Maya kings were path dependent on reservoirs. So when they lost their main foundation of power, they lost power, period. Okay. But families persevered, and they still do. There's over 7 million Maya living today in Central America and elsewhere. And it speaks to their sustainable way of life as farmers, as agriculturalists for 4,000 years. How? I argue through an inclusive worldview that guided their daily existence and engagement with the non-human world, a collaboration. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. So the Maya inclusive worldview, and this, if you're interested, you can email me. I can send you a PDF of this article. So this inclusive worldview situates objects, humans, animals, land, water, everything on the same plane. I'm not saying everything's equal, but everything's animated, and each plays a role. Each has a role in maintaining the world, and thus themselves. So the Maya were one with worlds rather than nature. In other words, this inclusive worldview is non-anthropocentric. So everything is animated, everything has a soul, and it's the souls that interact with each other. So everything is connected. Everything is like a member of the family, if you will. So there's a more of a merged existence versus Cartesian dualism, like evil, good, secular, and religious, or something like that. They don't have those kind of dichotomies that we do. And this is a great quote from this book of songs and spells and stories by Maya women. All mountains are dressed as father mothers, the tutelary gods, because we don't, English does not have the terminology to reflect this merged existence. So the reason I use this quote is because we don't have a term that represents both father mother. So it's translated as father mother. But so we need terms like good, evil, dangerous, and sacred. All these things. So, and also they had a different way of thinking about time and movement. Instead of linear, past, present, and future, they had a more circular way. And think of a spiral. And so when I mentioned renewal before. It's because death begets life through renewal, and souls are recycled. As a matter of fact, a Mayan word, keshol, is the same as replacement or infant, okay? Because it's the souls are recycled. And it's not just, and all souls are recycled. So everything is connected. And because everything's connected, you're not going to kill off other entities that maintain the world. Okay. So, and the evidence for this, and I use ethnographies, ethnohistory, the archaeological record, and other kinds of sources of data. In Mesoamerican languages, and Maya in particular, there are not terms for nature or religion because they're just part of existence, and it's only been recently in Western culture where there has been a divorce between nature and culture. And there's no words for these because, like in the United States, most people are Christian and so they go to church on Sundays. But the Maya, everything they did was to maintain the world. So why do you need a term when it's just their daily life? So they had the comparable terms of the closest things. And again, this has been translated into English. So there's probably not the right terminology to even, translate these. I did not translate them because I don't speak there's over 30 Mayan languages, so this is Okul to enter God, or Uts Janbal, and so on. And also, somebody, I think, can you guys turn your things on mute? I hear some background noise.
Yeah, it's done now.
Okay, so Mayan languages also are ergative. There's a plurality of subjects. So they de-emphasize me, myself, and I, and emphasize we. The languages emphasize we, and that we includes clouds, plants, rivers, and mountains and animals. And I got this quote: Native Americans often refer to the sun, mountains, clouds, rain, and so forth in kin terms. So, but don't get me wrong, the Maya hunted, the Maya killed, but to survive, as far as I know, they never caused the extinction of any plant or animal. Okay. So it was a reciprocal kind of relationship that required ceremonies and kinds of things and other kinds of interaction and collaboration. And one kind was through forest collaboration. And this is a former grad student and one of my foremen. He's a Mopan Maya, Cleofo Chok. And they collected botanical specimens in areas with sites and without sites to look to see if the forest we see today is actually a descendant forest due to this collaboration, thousands of years of collaboration. And they did find, certain kinds of species that clustered in areas with ancient Maya sites, more so than areas without sites. Now, they collected over 300 different species in 40-meter diameter plots, and there are several. Now, Cleofo was able to identify about 95% of them, either in Mopan or Quechua Maya or Spanish, or sometimes English. And then Colleen spent the time looking to get the scientific name. And his knowledge is the same with animals. I mean, his knowledge in the jungle is amazing. Now, I did ask him, I'm like, that's so amazing, Cleofo. I'm just curious, the 5% you did not identify, why? He said, they have no use. So the fact that he could identify 95% of the plants in the jungle, and they all had a use: medicinal, fruits, weaponry, construction materials, garnishes, and poison like to stun fish, so on and so on. I mean, I've tried a lot of stuff. It's, food and medicine and stuff. So in other words, and probably this is the same case in every landscape with humans, that there's no such thing as a primary forest because there's always engagement with humans and non-humans. And also, not only do they cull and promote certain kinds of flora, they also relied on game in animal life. And this is just the national flower of Belize, the black orchid, which, orchids are exquisite flowers, but they only grow in decomposing matter. So this death begets life kind of concept. Okay, so they had a diverse, they didn't have a problem with lack of multivitamins or, very nutritious kind of thing with all of the variety in terms of flora and fauna, and plus what they grew. Now, both my graduate students are assessing the aspects of the sustainable way of collaboration in life. Rachel Taylor is looking at the fauna remains through centuries to look at forest health and biodiversity. And Yifan Wang is using isotope analysis and also the faunal remains to look at how, paleo-environmental changes intersect with Maya practices, and also looking at Maya practices of hunting and this kind of thing, and how they maintain their sustainable practices. Now, Colleen also got permission to map Cleofo's home garden. Your traditional Maya village has large plots of land. So here's his house here. And all of these numbers represent different species. So you can see some are replicated, but there's different food, medicine, household items, poison, again, to stun fish, construction materials, flowers, etc. There's some bird peppers, some mint here. And this is an old stump they used to churn butter. So when you go to these home gardens, it might look disorganized or a mess, but every tree, every bush has a role. And again, it mimics this diverse forest, as do fields, traditionally anyway. So monocropping was a foreign concept. So forest collaboration and agriculture and collaboration in terms of with the soils. And also you have a different kind of collaboration with portals, which are openings in the earth. So caves, like this is Aktun Tunichio, Muknal, and Belize. And again, for lack of our vocabulary in the English language, sacred and dangerous at the same time. It's where Chak, the rain god, lived, and other gods and ancestors. And this is how you communicate it with them. It's also the origin of clouds and rain. So I mentioned before that there's a limestone, bedrock. So it's karstic topography, limestone. And some limestone's really hard, and some's really porous, and some really sort of disassociates, sort of is eaten away really fast by water. So you have lots and lots of caves. So any opening in the earth is important. And these are, when the archaeologists were excavating, this is open to the public now. You have to get go on a special tour. And there are offerings in every portal, every opening in the earth, there are offerings. Because this is how you communicate with the gods and ancestors. But I am interested in watery portals, because a cenote, this is, limestone, and a cenote basically is a collapsed sinkhole where water from groundwater fills it up. Okay, so it's a steep-sided sink. A cenote is a steep-sided sinkhole fed by groundwater. Now, in the northern lowlands, where I don't work, that was north, there are over 7,000 cenotes because it's much lower elevation, so the groundwater is much higher. But in the southern lowlands where I work, the elevation is higher, so the water table is much lower, so there are fewer cenotes. Now, Cara Blanca, where I headed a diving expedition 10 years ago and started over 10 years ago, but it's in central Belize, Cara Blanca. And I'm showing, there are 25 water bodies, only about, not all are reflected here. Right now, they're just numbered. But this is that class 2 soil, this hatch pattern here. Now, these blue dots, another student did transect mapping, and each of these squares is a kilometer. Now, each dot can represent a small single solitary mound or a small settlement, a small compound, if you will. Now, near the water bodies that are lakes, we have both lakes and we have cenotes. Near the cenotes in the central here, 1 and 2, especially in 14 and 15, there aren't as many blue dots, Those are cenotes. So we find a lot of settlement near the lakes, only a little near the cenotes. And this is a drone of one of these cenotes. I'm arguing that these are pilgrimage destinations. And even during that period of several prolonged droughts between 800 and 900 CE, they never built cities here. They never built houses here. They didn't farm here. That's how sacred, for lack of a better term, to be honest, that's how sacred it was. But it's a different type of collaboration because they didn't farm there, they likely didn't hunt there or collect anything, vegetation. So that allows flora and fauna to flourish, which fosters biodiversity and provides a gene bank. And it's a type of conservation. So we have the direct interaction, the forced collaboration. Then we have another kind of collaboration, which is leaving it alone, like national parks kind of thing. So this is one of the pools. So just to give you an idea of scale, this is 100 meters diameter. And this particular pool is 20 meters deep. Now this is whiteface. This is limestone. That's why it's called Cara Blanca. Now I have been concentrated at pool 1, and it's a cenote. And it is, just to give you an idea of scale, this is 100 meters across. Okay. And the divers, it's over 65 meters deep. I just had to write myself a note. I always get ideas when I talk. And because it's at the base of a cliff, trees have been falling in. So in terms of finding offerings, because like I said, I showed you pictures of the offerings in the cave. Well, this is an opening in the earth. It's just that it's a watery opening in the earth. So, but they still made offerings, and they have found offerings in lakes and cenotes elsewhere. But because of the tangled mess of trees and the massive size of this and the massive depth, it was just challenging. And interestingly, they found another cave within, in this cliff face. There's another cave. That's another story. I don't have time to talk about it. They did find a fossil bed of megafauna. And one of my other grad students published a paper. They extracted a giant sloth tooth that dated 27,000 years old. And again, I have that, Larman et al. If you're interested, I have that article as well. Now, while the Maya didn't build cities here during that drought, that period with prolonged droughts, they did build pretty substantial a water temple and ceremonial structures near some of the cenotes. This water temple was built so close to the edge that part of it collapsed into the cenote, and the looters' trenches did not help. And we know they've been visiting here for centuries, if not longer, but they intensified their visits during these periods of droughts. Now, even though no matter how dire their circumstances became, they never built houses or fields or cities, and they could have. They did not. When they gave up near 900 CE, they dismantled the temple. Okay. And they also dismantled all of the water jars they use in ceremonies, which are much larger than you would use at home. And they would break them. And I know it's hard to see, but all of these have scalloped edges. If you can see with the arrow I'm using, they took like thumb-sized breaks. And because, and nor were there many household items that we excavated. But we tried to piece them together in the lab. None were complete. So they either threw pieces into the cenote or they took them home as keepsakes. This is called synecdoche, where one piece represents the whole, sort of like a favor. When you go to a party, you take a little gift bag or something like that represents the memory of in this case, the power of it. And we excavated other structures too. And not only were they water jars, but their indications, the styles of them, are from all over the Maya area, from the Petén in Guatemala, from the northern lowlands, from eastern Belize, from all over. People were coming here. Okay. Now, and also traditional Maya today or in the recent past, when they went on a pilgrimage, it was a scripted journey. And usually it's called a ceremonial circuit. They would stop along the way and they would follow the path of the sun. So the sun rises on the east and sets in the west. And of course, the Maya gods, created Cara Blanca going east-west. And we found a sweat bath in between poles 1 and 2, which is just off here. It's the Maya didn't really use the true arch. They used the counterweights called the vault system, the Corbel vault. But here they built a sweat bath. And if you're in the tropics, you don't need a sweat bath. But you need one for ritual purification. I mean, there's all the architecture and all the artifacts argue and support this idea. And when they left this area by 900, it was abandoned. They dismantled everything. They deanimated everything. Okay. So, and again, they could have built here because the water level doesn't drop that much. Okay. So yeah, it was pretty amazing to me. Now, this is the area, I am on the cliff looking south over the pools. And so pool 7 is right here. Don't worry about the numbers. So this is 2009 before this 2010 hurricane. And I know it's hard to see the difference, but trust me. And then in the dry season, all the dead trees, it was like a tinderbox and there was wildfires. So in this, the owners of the property, they lost a lot of it was a sustainable logging company. For every tree they cut, they planted 4 hardwoods. And they never did clear cutting. So they would go and cull. They were very careful. So you could never tell if this was a logging company for 30 years. But because of the massive damage of this hurricane, they sold 30,000 acres. And to non-Maya farmers of Spanish Lookout who are Mennonite farmers, and all they care about is farming. That's it. And this is what it looks like today. And so I got a 3-year NSF grant to do a salvage archaeology because all of these white smears are ancestral Maya houses, structures, small ceremonial compounds, and there are hundreds of exposed. And so Ifan, Rachel, and I last season, with the help of my foreman and excavation assistants, we excavated 14. We did salvage archaeology. That's different from regular because we just dig as fast as we can and take we take notes and photographs, but we don't do all the time-consuming drawing and measuring. We just are trying to get as much information because every time they plow, they remove about, 50, 60 years of history. Remember about the thatch hut I told you about, and they renew every 20 or 40 years? So every time they plow, so I got this NSF grant, the National Science Foundation grant in 2020, then the shutdown came. So couldn't go in 2020, 2021, went in 2022, and the new landowners didn't like the bad press they got after we showed our results. I invited them to see my presentation in Belize, where all archaeologists who have a permit in the country of Belize always presented this annual Belize symposium. I didn't say anything bad, but Belizeans were upset, and so they denied me permission. So I'm going to go down in June for a few days to try to convince them to let us go back in 2024. So fingers crossed. Now, insights for today. I'll finish up. I have a few more slides, so bear with me.
No problem. Take your time.
Thank you. So this is adapted from an article I wrote with a former grad student. So this is the anthropocentric worldview that has resulted in the Anthropocene, which is not something to brag about. And you know all about that. We have put humans up top, especially men, and everything else serves humans. And in our anthropocentric attempt to control or tame nature, it has led to the Anthropocene. Versus the inclusive worldview, everything's on the same plane. Again, not necessarily equal, but on the same plane. And because you work or collaborate, you work with nature like the Maya and many other indigenous or traditional peoples or pre-industrial, pre-modern, I don't know, whatever you want to call them. Many cultures around the world have this more sustainable, more different types of inclusive worldviews, but it results in millennia of sustainable living that we can learn from to adapt to a changing world in terms of climate change. Okay. So insights for today. In terms of our plans, our strategies to address climate change and to come up with sustainable plans, we cannot privilege humans. We need the world to survive, so we have to take care of it in addition to ourselves. So we can apply or learn from traditional ecological knowledge and work with local stakeholders, whether they be indigenous peoples or multi-generational farmers or something like that. And also, one thing that the Maya taught me, and hopefully you, is that they didn't have monocropping. You know, other than the kings relying on the reservoirs as their main power source, everyone else relied on diverse strategies in the field and the forest, fish, different kinds of water flora and fauna. And terrestrial or forest, and plus what they grew in their home gardens and in their fields. I mean, there was a plethora of kinds of food, non-path dependent. And it's important to collaborate with resources, to respect them as helping us survive. So we should try to help them survive, because the world out there's still so many unknown sources of food, medicines, building supplies, tools, games, sacred areas. We can create more parks like Cara Blanca to promote biodiversity and conservation. Also, biomimicry, like, for example, the diverse fields. Instead of monocropping, use multi-cropping. And CWs is constructed wetlands. Like in this article that's under review right now, I did research on the number of swimming pools in the United States alone. There are over 10 million swimming pools and over 300,000 public pools. And does it all have to be voluntary? Why can't people turn their swimming pools into the self-cleaning reservoirs or constructed wetlands? Because you can have all those different kind of aquatic plants and turtles and fish, and you could drink it and you can still swim. Just an idea. And this would also go to fulfilling the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 6, to ensure access to clean water for everyone, as well as encourage the participation of local communities versus top down. And then all of this stuff starts in the home. And we can't, when I hear about like governments voted to ratify the IPCC report, I'm like, big deal. It doesn't matter if we don't do anything about it. So what if government support it? That means nothing. And it's not just about money, because it's going to take both a bottom up, households and communities, and top down to adapt to changing climate in a sustainable manner. So diversity is key for a sustainable existence and to adapt to global climate change. And I have those separate because what may be sustainable today, in 10 years due to climate change, may not be sustainable. So one has to sort of try to predict the future when coming up with strategies. Other insights and applications like green cities, local resource networks, natural burials, changing labor technology ratios, etc. You can read about in my upcoming book, Maya Wisdom and the Survival of Our Planet, which, if all goes well, it still has to be reviewed, should come out in fall 2024, Oxford University Press. And also, in so doing, and this also promotes the need to preserve cultural heritage, not only for descendants or for us to enjoy as tourists, but to benefit our future, because the more we learn from our past, from our ancestors, the more it will help us adapt to future needs. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Sure.
It's
My
a wonderful
pleasure.
talk. I have learned so much.
Well, I'm
I think,
glad.
oh, sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead. Sorry.
I have attended your class many years ago, but now I feel I'm learning it all again. But I learned more, I think. Yeah, it's really amazing. It's very clear.
Oh, good. I'm glad you think so. And do you think I should expand anything, or was anything unclear you think I might need to explain to your students, or?
Uh, I think it's okay. Maybe we can ask if they have questions.
Okay.
Or if you don't mind, I'll just brief summarize
Okay.
your talk in Chinese.
Okay.
我非常简单的跟大家总结一下哈，有一些东西讲得很细，我是觉得首先Lucero 教授跟我们解释了一下为什么水在玛雅很重要。首先，它们的季节性是非常强的，有旱季和雨季，而且旱季是一点雨都不下，而雨季呢又有可能有台风啊，然后这个热带的暴雨等等这样一些问题。然后，那么他们农业大多数是在这个雨季进行，但是在旱季他们也是需要水的。所以水对他们来说非常重要。虽然我们想象着热带地区可能有很多水，但是因为他们的地质条件，他们是一个石灰岩地区，然后就很少有这种地表水，所以水对他们来说特别重要。然后也正是水给了他们的国王一些这个权利，这是他们主要的权利来源，他们去建造这样一些蓄水池。那么除了建造蓄水池呢，他们还需要去维护这个蓄水池，因为我们可以想象，如果是一个净水，对吧？它就那么一个净水在那里，它是很容易坏掉的，各种污染物就进去，然后可能有毒啊，或者说它会这个不好的生物长在里面啊等等，所以还需要一个很重要的做的一件事情，就是去维护这个净水池，让它是可以利用的。那么他们玛雅的人的这个策略呢，就是充分的利用生态多样性，他们有各种各样的水生植物，然后也有动物，然后包括这个蓄水池里面的这些鱼的产生的粪便还可以用来肥田等等，就是他们充分的就是有点像我们现在建造的人工的湿地这样子，它是一个利用生态多样性的这样一个系统，然后来维持这样一个蓄水池。然后接下来呢，Lucero教授又我讲的比较快哈，然后又解释了一下这个他们的这样一个世界观，这也是非常相关的，就是他们是认为万物有灵的，然后所有的这个灵魂是可以循环的。所以虽然他们也肯定是会去狩猎，然后去利用自然资源，但是他们不会合则而渔，不会去把某一种东西狩猎到死亡，然后他们跟各种东西之间的各种生灵啊，包括其实这个陶器啊、房屋啊等等，这些都是认为是有生命的，不仅仅是那个生物，都是认为有生命。那么跟他们之间的互动是一种合作协同的这样一个关系，是互惠的这样一个关系，这也是他强调的一点，对于我们现代是有很好的一个借鉴意义的。另外他还提到就是那个 cenote 那个。我不知道它中文应该怎么说，就是一个水坑吧可以认为，然后他举了那个 Carablanca 那个遗址的例子，它很有意思，它是一系列的这个水坑，但是然后做调查之后发现，这些玛雅人他们并没有居住在这些 cenote 附近，他们而是选择居住在湖泊的附近。这些 cenote 对他们来说是一个非常神圣的地方，是他们去朝圣的地方，他们在旁边会去建这个水神庙，但是他们不会住在那个附近。虽然其实住在那个附近是可以，但是他们不这样做，他们就是在那附近建神庙，然后即使在玛雅晚期的时候，这个环境已经很恶劣了，他们仍然是就是没有住在那里，然后他们还在那里进行了一个 宗教仪式来结束这个水神庙。对，然后之前卢塞尔教授也有提到，就是说我们通常认为的玛雅的这个崩溃系统，它只是这个贵族阶层的这样一个崩溃，因为他们的权力来源是水，那么在这个玛雅的这个 terminal 的这个 classic 这个阶段，它有很长时间的这个干旱，然后那么国王就没有办法去完成他的这样的一个承诺，他没有办法给民众提供水，然后这个时候，所以这些贵族阶层他们崩溃了，但是实际上玛雅的普通民众意识都是在的，他们仍然是可以在这个地方生活的，呃然后基本上就是到了这个，刚才提到他们，最近在做的一个项目，就是他们在一个地区发掘那个地方，早期的时候，还是很好的，但是最近因为山火啊，这个等等一些原因，这个当地的这个，土地拥有者要把它卖给那个。农民，然后就要去耕种，就会大规模的这个破坏森林啊，所以他们申请到了一个抢救性发掘项目，去那里做发掘，因为就是每更一层啊，就是几十年的这样玛雅的历史就不见了，因为它前面有讲过，对吧？玛雅的那个房屋，它是一层一层一层又一层这样去建造的，每一层20年、40年这样子，所以他们去在做这样一个抢救性发掘项目，但是今年出现了一些问题，但是他还是希望去继续沟通了，这是他也提到的一件事情。然后主要就是说对于当代的借鉴吧，就是我们现在常常很骄傲的说啊，我们现在是人类世了，是吧？我们人类的影响非常大了。那么从玛雅的这样一个发展经历来看，他仍然是觉得我们跟自然应该是一个和谐共处，是吧？就是应该学习古代玛雅人的这样一些合作精神，然后尊重自然，然后强调生物多样性，嗯。而且我们不仅仅要保证现在这个世界是可持续发展的，实际上我们也要考虑将来当出现环境变化的时候，我们应该怎么样面对，也是应该向玛雅人学习的。然后另外他还提到他有新书马上要出版，然后大家感兴趣的话也可以关注，也是相关的主题。我总结的比较简单，大家有问题的话可以提问。
I'd be happy to answer any questions or.
Yeah, I'm
这位老
asking
师可以
them.
吗？我是江波。
蒋老师好，您说。
Thank you very much, Professor Lisa. It's really a very inspiring presentation talking about the water system in lowland Maya culture. I think this is very helpful for our understanding. Talking about this kind of water pool, I can see this should be a kind of sacred pool. So, in Berlin, there are always dry season and rain season. So people treat this kind of pool as a sacred pool because you find water temple over there. So did they do some ceremony here in the dry season or in the wet season?
Well, good question whether they did it during the wet and dry. I think that the pilgrimage is going to be probably done during the dry season because the agricultural season is very time consuming and they have a lot of other rituals. They do, household rituals. They do rituals in the field. They do rituals hunting, so the time would be during the dry season because you can never assume it's the rainy seasons are going to start or at the right time, or if they're going to, I've been to Belize, 30 times, and the dry season, sometimes it ends with a bang, like major tropical storm where just, tons of water washes out everything because the roads are so hard because it's dried out for months and months. So it's just a massive flood. So you don't want that. So so the pilgrimages are just one type of ceremony, and those are more they're not as frequent as the daily kind of stuff you do at home and in the field or something like that. So these, they might be done once a year, based on ethnography, Sometimes they're done a couple times a year, just depending on the kind of needs. You do it usually to address something that's going on that you need the gods to address, to change that, to get them to change their minds or something. So they're less, the time frame is less, but I would definitely estimate that they're doing them during the dry season. And based on, I just read an ethnography, and it's about syncretism between Catholicism, after the Spanish conquest 500 years ago, and the forced conversion to Catholicism. But there are still a lot of Maya rituals, and it revolves around Easter week, which is April, which is in the dry season. And that the anthropologists doing the study argue that the rituals are very similar and the timing is as well. So I know that's a long answer, but summarize the dry season.
Thank you very much. Traditionally in China, people always did this kind of ceremony in the dry season. In China, we have this kind of water temple or dragon temple, because people believe that the dragon control the rain, right?
Yeah.
So always hold this kind of sacrifice to the temple in dry season. Ask for more rain.
Yep. I mean, every society in the world, and today the Midwest, where Illinois and the surrounding, I just read they supply 27% of the food in the rest of the United States, and also to the global market. But most of the farms around here are rainfall dependent. You don't see the massive irrigation systems. So they are, when I read the agriculture reports in the newspaper, they're dealing with very similar things, even though they have fancy equipment and fancy, I don't know what, but Mother Nature or Chalk, the rain god, or whatever, the dragon, they're capricious. They do what they want. And so they need to be appeased and stuff. So it's yeah, I mean, we still, even in today with all of our technology, we cannot control. We can try to predict, but I think a lot of people we're still making our own little sacrifices or ceremonies, or I hope it doesn't rain today, even if it's simple as that, it's part of who we are.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If other people are still thinking, I want to ask a question. So at very beginning, you mentioned that there's no irrigation. I'm quite surprised, because when I thought about those water systems, I thought they will have this kind of facilities, because they build a reservoir anyway. I thought they would have irrigation, but you said there's no irrigation at all. Like they all have rain-fed agriculture. The reservoir is for daily lives or things like that.
Well, I mean there are some small, very small, household size or very community level irrigation. It's very localized. Everything is so diverse, and you do have it in the northern lowlands, some irrigation, but in these areas with these big massive cities, you don't have massive irrigation systems, because the rivers are in gullies or valleys, so there's not that, and you need gravity to move the water, and and so that was the main challenge, but they dealt with it quite well. In the reservoirs, they did drain them. They did use the waters for, I think, the main reservoirs in the urban core were on the top elevated areas, and then there were lower level reservoirs. And I think it was more like the next level were less elite households, and the water might have been more gray, less clean, if you will. And then I think it was used for agriculture. So in draining the reservoirs, it could be conceived as an irrigation system, but because it's from the reservoir versus the river, I think they use the but some of these cities supported from 80 to 100,000 people. So these reservoirs had to provide water, and then they use water to make the plaster. And I think they use the dirt or the gray water to make plaster, and to nourish the fields in the cities, and to make plaster, because everything is plastered. the white plaster, and they're colored too. They have red, you have blue, you have yellow. So I focus on the containing the water and then draining it. But even drained water, I'm sure every drop was used.
I
So
see.
did I answer your question?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I understand now. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, if anyone, again, I'd be happy to share publications and if people want the inclusive worldview one, and others, whatever. I have several, and a lot can
Thank
be
you.
found on my faculty website as well.
Yeah.
I try to provide links to all of them, kind of thing.
Thank you. I want to ask another question, if you don't
Of
mind.
course.
So you mentioned this termination ritual for the houses, and it's roughly 20-year cycle. You explained that the roof cannot last that long, but you also mentioned there will be people buried in those houses. So I wonder when do you exactly do this deanimation? When someone died, or it's because of the roof is collapsing, or
well,
like that?
it's just the thatch roof. They use the bay leaf, and it looks like a what do you call it? It's a kind of palm, and it looks like a big fan, and they squish it together and then they overlie them, and they're waterproof. I mean, they are. But then over time, you get a lot of interesting inhabitants: scorpions, snakes, possums, tarantulas. And then also, I mean, they can repair them, for leaks, but depending, about 20 years, they need to be replaced. But their calendrical system is, their numerical system is base 20. So we're base 10, decimal 10 and 20. They're 20, 40, 60, 80. So the 20-year period is half a cocoon or 40 years. I mean, so archaeologists have argued that they bury the person, whoever dies closest to this 20-year calendrical event, because those burials, I had the letter B representing burials. And I said that those two small structures we excavated were each occupied for almost 800 years, again and again renewing. But there are 7 burials in one and 5 in the rest. There's no way that represents 800 years worth of family members. And so the Chases, who excavate at Caracol, they have tombs. They've excavated over 300. She's a bioarchaeologist, and they have inscriptions. They have a lot of radiocarbon dates. They're the ones who estimate that only 10% of people are buried in house floors. And so they argue that likely, because we find men, women, and children, so there's no bias towards one sex or the other or age. So that's why they argue that whoever dies closest to this calendrical, which also translates to when you need to replace your roof. So they just start anew. They perform the funerary. They dig a hole in the floor. They place the person, engrave funerary objects, and then they burn and smash everything. And then, so you have the person, and then grave goods. Then you have burning and smashed, and then you have whole that animate the new house. So again, that renewal. So we see stratigraphy layers, but it's actually very, dynamic and expresses this renewal. Now the question is, and this is a question I address I think I addressed it in one article, I can't remember, but what do they do with the 90% of people they did not bury? Well, I think, and ethnohistorically, they plant trees over their bodies. So I think that some of the forests are forests of souls that they give, because remember, the souls are recycled. So I think that, what we would call natural burials, they're just put out, they're given back, because the souls are recycled. Corporal remains of once you're dead, or, that's what I think.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Oh,
yeah.
so
yeah. So yes, yeah. I mean, I and I mean, we find some in caves, but not representing 90% who are not buried in house floors or the flowers of tombs or shrines. So yeah, and there's no cemeteries. I mean, until the
No
Spanish
cemetery.
came. No, not until the Spanish came, because they were you have cities and you have the rural farmsteads dispersed. And when the Spanish came and conquered the area, they found it very hard to control them. So they forcibly nucleated them into villages. So you didn't have villages before, per se. And of course, then you started to see cemeteries after the Spanish came. But prior to that, no cemeteries. We haven't found any.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it further supports the fact that they were I mean, bodies provide great food for worms and animals, and so they gave back. They helped fertilize other life. Death begets life.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, maybe it helps us to think about where, in some periods, we don't find many burials and we wonder where they are. So maybe it's a similar idea.
Yeah, I mean, if there are remnants historically in traditional, like older ethnographies, where they talk about, they plant a tree over the dead body. I mean, and so when people die, and over generations, you have a grove, you have trees, and there are certain kinds of trees. So I don't know, I mean, if there's maybe a certain kind of tree found or related to death or life, or pollen might be able to tell us, or something like that. I mean, I'm only just exploring this, and I expanded a bit in the book, but I think the forests, some of the forests we see today, are these cemetery. Death begets life.
By the way, congratulations on your new book.
I mean, it's due by the end of the summer, and it still has to go out for review. So, but I'm being optimistic, and hopefully, so I'm hoping it gets through. It's written for a more general audience, and I've never done that before, so I'm a little nervous, but I'm taking a chance mentioning it. But it is what it is. I'm hoping for the best.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure it'll be good.
Thank you.
Any questions? 如果大家想问，也可以敲字，或者要是说中文，我也可以帮忙翻译。有问题吗？They're being shy.
I think that's pretty common in my class. When people are like this, I start talking about my nieces and nephews. I usually get people. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and they all have kids. So I have 9 nieces and nephews. They range in age from 18 to 29.
Okay. So they are all adults now.
Yeah. I still brag about them, I mean. So, well, if somebody comes up with one, and they can either email me through you or email me directly, or they come up with an idea, a question later on, that's fine. Feel free to contact me or something. Yeah.
Okay. Before you go, can I ask one more thing if they don't ask?
No.
So I'm quite surprised to know that those reservoirs, they are like wetlands. I thought about they are like a dam, standing like in the modern water. It's very clean, no plants at all. But you mentioned it's actually like a wetland. I'm quite surprised. So is it very easy to use this kind? But you said it's clean, but you have all kinds of plants and also animals living there. Is it easy to get water from it?
Well, I mean, the wetlands, I mean, they made the reservoirs. The question is, they had to figure out how to keep them clean. And that's what they learned from the wetland biospheres, like of what plants to use, because they couldn't be too deep because the roots of certain plants have to attach to the bottom. So they're limited and all this. But there's some cenotes that have steps on the edge. There are some that are sloped. There are some, so they would have, I'm not really sure because a lot of people don't excavate reservoirs. They excavate, the palaces, the big houses. So right now, all we have are filled in, some still have water, but some mostly are filled in with sedimentation, but they're still massive. But we don't know if they're like the Badai and Angkor, where they're carved, these beautifully carved stones on the side, with Hindu symbolism and gods and all this kind of thing. There's, I'm just hypothesizing about the aquatic plants based on what we know today on constructed wetlands, which civil engineers are promoting as ways to treat water not naturally, not using chemicals. The question is scale. Like, we need to find a way to expand the size of the water bodies to apply this strategy. Yeah. So yeah, I don't, I mean, that's a really great question. I really hadn't thought about how people actually got it on a day-to-day basis, especially when there's so many people. I mean, we talk about the drainage channels and ditches and all of this stuff. They assume they're all for drainage, but I'm wondering if some of them are actually drained to like water tanks that people can, and I'm sure it must have been like that. Yeah, I had thought about that, honestly. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Let's see.
董老师，我看没有人提问，要不我再加两句，可以吗？
好呀，江老师，欢迎。
Hi, Professor Lisa. Thank you for this wonderful presentation again. If I can politely draw your attention to the keyword cultural landscape, it should be helpful for us to understand this kind of circumstance in Belize, Cultural landscape is always means 4 layers meanings. Firstly, the land use. Secondly, the traditional knowledge. Thirdly, the social structure. And finally, the belief system. So your research on this side help us to understand deeply on the ancient eco-cultural system, how people deal with the natural and human beings, balance each other. So it's really amazing and really inspiring to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm glad you got something from it. I'm my last few years working on this, it's been the funnest, the most exciting in my entire academic career, working on this because it's fascinating. And the cool thing is that has implications for, using, and I'm just focusing on water management. I mean, I have stuff in the book that, looks at agriculture and city life and all these kinds of things that all come back to this inclusive worldview. So thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'm underwater archaeologist, so I'm really interested in your the underwater archaeology in the caves. You mentioned it last night. You find 20,000 years ago fossil, right?
I'm sorry.
Underwater. What's the date of the fossil you find in the underwater cave?
Well, that was a fossil bed about 20 meters below the surface of the water. That one is 27,000 years old. Now, Gene Larman, my former student, worked with Stan Ambrose. He runs the isotope lab here. And they've applied these new methods to look at, and I forgot all the methods because it's not my thing, but they realized that 27,000 years ago, it was more savanna. So instead of a 5-month dry season, it was a 9-month dry season. And so I had a paleontologist who was a diver who found the tooth. the fossil bed, and it has hundreds of fossils. I mean, it's crazy. But so the fossil bed starts about 20 meters below the surface of the water. Now he thinks that 27,000 years ago, when it was much drier, that the level would have been about there. Now the thing is, it's deep-sided. So he thinks that there's so many fossils because during the when it was even drier, that these megafauna, like giant sloth, went down into the cenote to get to the water, but then they couldn't get back out because it was so steep. So they got stuck. That's what he thinks. So that's just one tooth. We don't know how long, because during glaciation, of course, all the water's being sucked up into the glaciers, so all the water tables are lower. So that's just one tooth. We don't know if the fossils all date to that time period, or if they date to, because these megafauna were around 2 million years to 10,000 years ago. So, so we need to get back. Once I do the salvage archaeology, I hope to get back to Cara Blanca.
Yeah, I know people also find this kind of underwater cave in Mexico.
Oh yeah, there's now Mexico, because it's and that's in the northern lowlands. It's much lower elevation, so the water table is much higher. So they have tons more cenotes, and then they are connected by underground river systems. But where I work in the southern lowlands, the divers, when they dive, they feel the water flowing, but it's flowing through the porous limestone. So instead of underwater river systems, it just flows through the stone. I mean, there are some, so we're just beginning. It's going to take a while. And again, I couldn't ignore the deforested areas exposing all those ancestral Maya houses. So I felt I had to dig those first. So then I'll get back to Cara Blanca. That's the plan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good story. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions. Oh, there's one. My colleague.
I'm the shy audience. Actually, I'm thinking about how to ask the question that I'm interested. And we've read one of the article about the politics of rituals, and I wonder, have you think the mechanism of the origins and the maintenance of the power in classic Maya? Do you think they have changed? The mechanism have changed, or you still think rituals are the main, the motives, or the motivations?
Well, I mean, I think rituals are critical for every political system. I mean, look at King Charles's coronation coming up. I mean, he uses an old stone in an old chair. I mean, ritual is so critical. So traditional rituals will always be important, and you still find them done today. But so in that article you're talking about, and I still argue for that. I argue that they used traditional rituals, but included more and more people doing them at a larger scale to attract more subjects and more tribute payers and all of this. And so when the kings collapsed, by 900, people continued, they never stopped doing those same rituals, the ancestor rituals, the animation rituals, the deanimation rituals. And even today, in traditional Maya communities, they still do them. They might add Christian elements now, but they're still the same. They're still so critical,
So I wonder. So I wonder, have they how to say the role of the rituals, and do you think it is still the key point of the origins of power, or the water management power of?
Yes,
I think this is it.
I think
what I understand.
I mean, because Maya, I mean, they, before the emergence of kings, before the emergence of cities and all of that, everyone needs water during the dry season. There's always been rain rituals, rain ceremonies, water rituals. Yes, same thing. In that article you mentioned, I focus on domestic rituals, expanded and used to maintain power. But I don't think I emphasized enough, though, that every ritual they just took to a bigger level, and incorporated more and more people. So early rulers, so all of it was tied together. The emergence of more people, the emergence of more water needs, the increasing scale of domestic rituals and water rituals and rain rituals. It's critical even today. I mean, the political rallies are still ritual. They still perform the same. They still have the same music or the same uniforms or the same, it's all this pomp and circumstance. I don't see any political leader in power today that doesn't do rituals that everyone can be a part of. Oh, I do that too at home, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's human nature. It's political nature, but they still have to have a foundation to support their increasing bureaucracy, administration, military personnel, and they have to get that through the tribute and labor or these days taxation from us, I think. So
thanks so much. And another question is, I think it is very convincing that you use the example of the Tang Dynasty and the Zhou Dynasty of China, Chinese ancient civilization, to illustrate that in Chinese ancient civilization, there are also kind of things to use the ritual in the politics to gain the power, those kind of things. So I think one of very prominent archaeologist Zhang Guangzhi, as Chinese archaeologist Zhang Guangzhi, have said that argued that Chinese civilization and Maya civilization they have one similarities which is very prominent, because their ancient civilization are all, how to say that, continuity of their development is continuous. Has character of continuity compared with, how to say, kind of Mesopotamia civilization. How do you think about this opinion?
I totally agree. I think and now that article you mentioned, that was 2003, I think. Well, I wrote a book in 2006 called Water and Ritual: The Rise and Fall of Classic Maya Kings or Rulers, one of those. And in it, I bring in a lot more case studies because it's the same everywhere. And oftentimes, like I remember in the Egyptian pharaohs and the Chinese emperors, the mandate of heaven, if you will, it always related to crops and all of this. And when it came down to it, it's water. If there's enough rain, too much, not enough, flooding from the rivers, this kind of thing. And if it's detrimental to everybody's food source, we blame whoever's in power. And so it's President Biden's fault that the banks failed, and then, but they also get the praise for if things go really well. And of course, they convince everyone that it's, of course, due to their excellent political abilities that everything's going so well. So, but you still need to promote solidarity, and that is through doing something everyone does, that every household member does. Birthday party or birthday celebration or funeral rites, or in the case of the Maya, animating houses. Instead of you have animating the thatch structures all the way to animating the biggest palaces, they're all the same. They just have, in the palaces, of course, they have nicer stuff, and they have a larger audience, and of course they can feed that, and they can give, they can provide entertainment, dancers and food and ball games and this kind of thing. So it's the same everywhere. every case study I've looked at throughout the world, the emergence of leaders, they cannot do it without ritual. And not only that, it has to be traditional ritual that is expanded. And all my research supports that. Wherever you see the emergence of the first political power, the first political leadership, it's always based on expanding and integrating more people by using traditional rituals. I mean, they still have to have a foundation. Like, they needed to make their money somehow. And for the Maya, it was increasingly the Maya kings controlling the water to bring in more and more people. And because of that, they had more tribute, more goods, and more labor, so they could throw bigger and bigger things. So as long as it's going well, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But since they just put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, on the water, when that supply dried up, literally, so did their power. So that's why financial advisors always tell us, diversify your portfolio, right? And so Maya kings didn't. Some kings do throughout the world, and some don't. Maya kings did not.
Actually, in terms of today's lecture, I think I found a lot of similarities between Maya civilization and the Mesopotamian civilization, because they all depend on white land. Sorry, sorry.
We discussed this. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, actually, I want to finish this question because I'm really interested about this, because I think these two kind of civilizations, they all depend on wetland ecosystems, and they all lasted for thousand years and collapsed because of kind of mega drought. And so, how do you think about this?
I teach a class. It's a lower division class for second year, third year students. It's called Climate Change and Civilization. And I talk about the impact of climate change. And yes, sort of like ritual, same thing with climate instability, because, especially, pre-mechanized, modernized kinds of things, people relied on the gods to provide rain, to provide fertility, and all this kind of stuff. And so that became very critical. So in today's lecture, I mentioned that kings were water managers, and that was one of their duties. And when they failed as a water manager, that really impacted their power. And same thing with, Mesopotamia, the reliance on the rivers, and in Egypt and China and Andean South America, Cahokia in the United States, yes. And so in the book, the 2006 book, and if you're interested, I have a PDF of it. I talk more about how they all intersect, the different aspects of power, ritual, and everything else. Well, not everything else, but yeah, because it's never just one thing, but there are things that you do find in every case of the first kings, the first political leaders. It's traditional rituals writ large. It's dealing and adapting to or not adapting to climate instability, mega droughts, or mega flooding, and sometimes they can deal with it. So it's how those things intersect. And that's why you have, sometimes you have long histories. The Maya kings were around for 1,000 years. That says a lot. And, Chinese emperors were around for 2,000 years, different dynasties, I know. But in Mesopotamia, you had different political systems. In Egypt, you've had so many different political systems, but the farmers never left. These political systems are like a superimposed. They serve a role. They provide protection. They provide food in times of need, or like from granaries or something like this. But so people don't like trait lists, and I'm not a proponent of that either. But I do think there's fundamental things that we find in every complex society, especially when it comes to political power. And even you can see some of it today.
Thank you so much for your very insightful answer.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. If that's the end of the question, any more? Sorry for keeping you up so late.
It's okay. Excuse me. No worries whatsoever. This has been fun.
Oh, thank you. Any questions? Okay, if not, maybe if you any of the audience have more questions, they can email you, or
Yes.
they can let me know and I can forward it. And
Yes.
thank you so much again for giving this wonderful talk. It's like Professor Jiang and Professor Ma have said, it's very insightful and have given us a lot of thoughts. And there are so many aspects that are similar in Maya and China and elsewhere. Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Well, you have to talk to Yifan. She was invited to do a workshop at UCLA on comparing China and Maya.
Oh,
so, yeah.
When is that?
Yeah, she just told me today. So that's
okay.
Yeah, I think that there she is. Is that was
when
it?
Is your talk, Yifan?
It's on May 20th. Yeah, Professor Li Ming and also Professor Li Xingwei try to organize a whole workshop for the both student and also the Maya major professors, just trying to talk about like the comparison study together.
Wow.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I'm very excited for her. So yeah, we're going to talk more about it later. So
yeah. Looking forward to the outcome of your symposium, and maybe you can share with us later.
Yes, well, I'm honored that you invited me, and it's so wonderful to see you again. It's been a while, so.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
I really enjoyed this, and so it'd be, and I'd look more. Perhaps we can all do something more in future for the comparative aspects of China and, classic Maya or something.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right. All right. Well, then if that's it, then I think I'll sign off. And is that okay? Or
Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope we can have you again maybe another time if you if you have time.
I'd love to. Yeah, I love to. And again,
so
thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Right,
we are honored to have you.
I say good night to Yifan and good morning to you.
Good night.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.